Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. So I was doing a little follow-up on the how raiding had changed from vanilla to Wrath of the Lich King video, and was checking into what happened to the scene between Cataclysm and Warlords of Draenor, and of course I got to the subject of LFR, or looking for raid, and I wrote a lot, and decided in the end I'm just going to make it into its own video. So here we are. I feel like I'm unearthing this topic that has been truly done to death at this point between LFR good and LFR bad. And being the primarily classic focus guy for World of Warcraft, you will be totally unsurprised to hear what I think personally. And you know what, initially I was just going to do a video on why it had failed as a concept, but I ended up thinking, that sounds really boring, there are tons of videos out there like that. I think it's a lot more interesting to take both sides as much as I can and weigh in on it at the end, because how many videos are out there praising LFR having saved the game? I think you'd be quite hard pressed to find them. So off I went to see online how it was approached back then, why was it made, what the devs thought of it, what the players thought of it, both now and then. I even went on the general forums, much to the dismay of my sanity and eyeballs. If that isn't worth a like on the video, and a sub as well if you can do that, I don't know what is. So let's get into it by starting off with the positives that this new system brought into the game. Now if you didn't know, Looking for Raid was introduced to WoW in the last raid tier of Cataclysm, patch 4.3 on the 29th of November 2011, along with the final raid, Dragon Soul, and its inception was driven by the dev team at the time headed up by Greg Street, aka Ghostcrawler, who I'm going to be referencing a fair bit throughout the video. Indeed, in the weeks and months following the introduction of Raid Finder, it was enormously successful. Well, in terms of interaction with the content, that was. No longer was it a requirement to join a guild, set up a raid team, log in at a specific time to see the raiding content that the game offered. Press a button and the queue system would find you a group as you go on about your usual gameplay. And Ghostcrawler remarked it as a success in the wake of Cataclysm, and up to approaching Mists of Pandaria, he called it a big win, as it opened up a new area of the game to any player to both experience and potentially provide a doorway into raiding as a whole. An article here from Ian very much chimes in on the positives, allowed more players than ever before to experience the conclusion of an expansion's major story arc, as millions of players defeated Deathwing compared to the thousands that had defeated Kel'Thuzad back in 2006. That is another big positive. Raiding isn't just there for their content, the boss fights, the difficulty. Raids have always been at the absolute core of World of Warcraft's story and lore. What happens inside raids has been a driving factor for WoW since the very beginning, if I'm honest. Getting to see the raid, hear the music, the voice acting, feel the atmosphere was now open up to all players. This is the story mode, the tourist mode. Come see the sights, defeat the bosses, and then be done in time for dinner. It's not there for the challenge, it's there for the atmosphere, right? Moreover, opening the raid content to anyone had let people in there who would have never considered themselves to be a raider personally due to conditions or other mitigating factors, though I can't help thinking there are a lot of great single player RPGs out there to make up for it. I mean, I wouldn't eat something that I know I'm allergic to, if you see what I'm saying, but getting back on track. It cut away that need for a schedule and for players to be able to jump into what was perceived as endgame content at any point in time. Finally, you could raid based upon your schedule, not what only worked for a large collective of people. Although there's some people who can only find a few hours now and again and just do not have the ability to commit to a schedule week by week. On top of this, it removed the player creative barriers. If you played during Wrath of the Lich King, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. The pug scene on retail really was nowhere near as much developed as it is in Classic these days. Like in Vanilla, for example, Molten Core was pugged, Blackwing Lair not so much, AQ40, yeah, forget about it. The 20-man raids were done frequently, however. In TBC it was much the same. I remember the server I was on never really getting too far past the 10-man raids, but that'll be a different experience for different players. By Wrath of the Lich King, the first raid tier was really easy. Anybody could pug Champion of the Frozen Wastes, and there was also the LFG system for dungeons by a later patch in the same expansion. But the pug scene in Wrath picked up quite a bit. However, players needed ways to screen players to make sure they have some idea of what they're doing, and this was done through two things. Number one, the gear score add-on, which just tallied up the item level on all of your gear and gave a number. And everyone knows somebody with lots of gear must be a great player. Yes, of course. Secondly, achievements. These were new to Wrath of the Lich King and were concrete proof that you had done the content before. There was add-ons that you could install to fake them though, which I definitely remember using on alts to get into groups. They weren't account-wide back then. And what would happen is players would form pugs and only take you if you could provide the achievement of already having completed the raid. So in order to join many groups, you had to have already done the raid. So how do you do the raid then? Just do it, I guess. LFR cut all of this player-made nonsense out, and to be honest, a lot of it was complete nonsense. Majority of pugs were full of people faking achievements in off-spec gear to boost their gear score, semi-AFKing. People just really didn't care that much. No longer were invites only for the super geared people who had done it or the flavour of the month's specs. Anybody could get into LFR at a very low barrier to entry, and if you were unable to commit to a raid schedule, you had to test the waters with pugs. And honestly, it was a miserable experience for the most part. I really have very few good memories of the pug scene back then. Moving on, and as promised, I visited the general forums to see what counter-arguments there were to people creating posts saying LFR bad, which, at the expense of many brain cells, I managed to determine that people argued it's not causing any harm or bothering anyone, so why is it a problem? Debatable, we'll talk about this later. I pay $15 a month, so I deserve to see the content. Okay, Karen. And finally, it's necessary to keep the game alive and going healthily. You know you're talking to a well-adjusted individual when the counter-argument is I will disagree with anything that you say. I also found there was this kind of weird, how can I put it, oddly smug vibe that people in favour of LFR had when it came down to it existing, as if they were really getting one over on those damned elitist Mythic Raiders or high-level Mythic Plus players who want to take their fun away. Now I know fun's subjective, but it's as if the thought process is that the guys in Limit are seething that super casual players are getting to witness an Azoth encounter firsthand. No one cares that the content is there. And yet, if asked whether LFR should be removed, you would hear a lot more yes than no, I feel. And the type of player who cares enough about the game to engage in this kind of poll or content alone should be grounds enough for this to be the case. But it's not because it exists necessarily, but just the way it's being done. And, well, it leaves a lot to be desired. The full queue system that LFR had seems more like a last resort when other things could have been tried before. But let's have a look at some more articles on it first, starting with some more words from Ghostcrawler. In the wake of Cataclysm, it seemed like LFR had been a big hit, but several years down the line, it had started to show its issues. Now, Ghostcrawler is very self-critical, I will say that, and these days he's at Riot Games working on League of Legends, but he does bring up some points that I would like to mention later on too. So let's start this off with something he mentioned in an AMA that he did. When asked about whether he had any particular regrets from his design decisions at his time at WoW, he said this: I have a lot of regrets about Raid Finder for World of Warcraft. The goal of getting more players into raiding is a good one, but the way Raid Finder turned out removed, in my opinion anyway, a lot of the epicness of what made raiding. Another quote here to follow up on that, Ghostcrawler again. The problem with Raid Finder was that if the content was too tough, meaning easier than normal raiding but still not a cakewalk, then people would tend to drop the raid after a wipe or two. You get these revolving doors where the raid itself was stuck on a boss, but the individuals in the raid had cycled through maybe hundreds of players in a few hours. The alternative was to make the difficulty level so easy that you'd probably steamroll every boss, and that's sort of where we ended up. But it meant you weren't really doing a rotation, lots of people were AFK, and these famous bosses hit like kittens. Here's a bit more on this subject from Ian. We endeavoured to preserve encounter mechanics where possible, but had to significantly adjust unforgiving abilities, especially those that allowed a single player's mistake to result in the entire group's failure. In traditional organised raiding, a group of players generally learns from mistakes and masters the content together, and they bring that collective knowledge with them in subsequent weeks. In Raid Finder, which put players in random groups each week, there was a clean slate with regards to mastery of the encounters. Having to essentially redo progression each week is few players' idea of fun, so we had to significantly accelerate the Raid Finder learning curve. And there's the problem, the two ideas are at odds with each other. Have some level of difficulty leading to a constant carousel of players and ever-growing determination stacks, not to mention how toxic the anonymity behind LFR gets, or make the content incredibly easy to the point where everything falls over, mechanics don't matter, and these huge storied bosses that have been built up over months or sometimes even years fall over in a few minutes. You can't really win either way around. Here's my point. LFR got more people into raid, but not more people into raiding. Ian commented this: Raid Finder, it turned out, was great for players who had no interest or ability to participate in organised raiding at scheduled times. Another quote from Ghostcrawler: there isn't a ton of motivation to work with a group of strangers when the game can just find you another group trivially. Or how about this from Ghostcrawler as well? I wish we had done flex raiding before raid finder. Flex still feels like raiding. Still feels like raiding. Wow, that sums it up really. As for me, I put myself through some more LFR reluctantly to see if times had changed, and it's like the whole system has been in a time capsule since 2011. Still the same eerily silent until something goes wrong kind of raid, people AFKing, and people either assuming the content is easy so they don't have to try, or literally have no clue what's going on. And I'd already heard plenty of horror stories about LFRners off, but yeah, this was really something else. If something akin to LFR exists, it could have been better, or at least to have explored other ideas first. If we tried flexible raiding first, like Ghostcrawler mentioned, or perhaps you might remember at the end of Wrath of the Lich King the statue in the centre of Dalaran that showed the cinematic of the Lich King's fall. This was such an enormous lore moment that it kinda had to be shared with all the players in-game in one way or another. What if each raid had some kind of summary cinematic, or a short scenario where you see what other people do inside the raid? I mean, people argue LFR is there for the story. That would cover your story in my opinion. The argument you're paying for the game and therefore deserve to see all the content is just willful ignorance or irony as far as I'm concerned. Or maybe people just really are that entitled. LFR is certainly with its benefits, but it's also fundamentally flawed, and has never quite worked in doing anything beyond getting more people to see the raid content. And it's not that I don't want people to see raid content. Raiding is easily the best part of retail in my opinion. It's just we went from 0 to 100 with LFR, and both the previous and current League game developers haven't looked back on it too favourably either. But it's here now, and no doubt here to stay. You know what though, I usually ask your thoughts at the end of the video, but I reckon I know what 99% of them will be, so instead, answer me this. Let's say some form of queue-based raiding has to exist in World of Warcraft. How could it have been done better than LFR? For me, I'd have liked to see flex raiding first, or at least to see the queue kept server specific to get a bit more of a know in the crowd on your server, so you could build relationships and begin to rely on others a little bit more. So do let me know what you think as well. I hope you enjoyed the video, looking forward to the comments on this one, and as always, I will see you in the next one, very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.